Have I mentioned how much I love the pacing in this series yet? Because I do. I love it so much, and I am absolutely sure that as these episodes go by, you have more and more people complaining that not a lot is happening in this series so far, and maybe it's just me, maybe I'm the weird one, but I love that. I love it so much. I love that we can spend an entire episode introducing this one character and forming that relationship with Rudeus, letting it breathe, letting us understand why they grow closer together. The pacing of this series so far has probably been its greatest strength, and I can only hope and assume that they will keep it up for this entire story. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and this is my review of Episode 3 of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation, A Friend. And before we get into this review, I just want to say that I know some source readers are watching this, but you also have to keep in mind that a lot of anime-onlys are watching this as well, and I myself am an anime-only. So keep the spoilers, keep the hints, keep just talking about the future of this series to a minimum, because it will make discussion with anime-onlys a lot more fun, and it just makes it easier for me to do reviews in general. With that out of the way, what another fantastic episode, man. My god. And there's two big sides to the story this week that I really want to focus on. One is obviously the relationship and dynamic between Rudeus and the newly introduced Sylphie, and the other is the relationship and dynamic between Rudeus and his father Paul. And this is going to seem really strange, but I want to start with Paul first, because he was the most interesting aspect of the episode for me. And I'm surprised to even be saying that, because Paul, up to this point in the story, was actually the character I was the least attached to. It's not like I disliked him or anything, he was fine, but obviously we didn't really see much to his character before now, and the development and the perspective we got from him this week was just so surprisingly great. Paul this episode shows a dilemma that he's been facing the entire series so far. An insecurity about Rudeus, raising a son that is already seemingly so mature and doesn't really need any guidance or discipline, could assumedly really affect you as a parent. It would make you feel like you're not doing enough, or that you're not needed. And Paul even comments that if he told Rudeus to get out of his house at that moment, he probably would. He has the mental age and maturity to be able to do something like that, even though he really shouldn't at this point in his life. And that frustrates Paul a lot. He reaches a point where Rudeus attacks another kid in the village, which, as we will get into later on, is completely justified, but doesn't hear out any of Rudy's reasons and wants desperately just to be able to scold him, to be able to discipline him and treat him like a kid that needs his guidance and parenting. This was such a great way of showing Paul's mentality here, and the way they approached the psychology of raising a kid who's technically already grown up like this is something I don't think I've ever seen another isekai series tackle in this way. This is something another author probably wouldn't even think about, and yet it fleshes out these characters, it fleshes out Paul of all people into somebody deeper and multifaceted. It also just reflects how new to parenting Paul is, and Zenith for that matter. They're trying to figure all of this out, they're wondering if things are turning out the way that they should, they make mistakes, and I really love that Paul, once he gets a grip on what he did wrong, the fact that you can't just force your way into being this disciplining father, he just apologizes, man. He apologizes. No excuses, no justification. He says, I am sorry. I was wrong. And I can't tell you what a breath of fresh air that would be if people did that more often in the real world. He's a good dude, man, and I also like that we got a little bit of foreshadowing into his own history and his own past with his own father. I assume all of that will come back into the story at some point. Maybe it was just flavor lore, but I genuinely think that's something that will play a part in the story later on. But now that we've talked about Paul enough, let's get into what was really the main focal point of the episode, and probably what most people walking out are going to be talking about. Sylphie, man. She's adorable, I already love her, and knowing this series, she's probably going to be gone in the span of 1 to 2 episodes. Sylphie by herself though is interesting because I don't really have much to say about her character specifically. She's super great, don't get me wrong, but the complexities regarding her character this episode really came specifically from Rudeus and his dynamic with her. For one, they do a gender confusion thing where Rudeus thinks she's a guy the entire episode, and I never really bought into that, but it's also something that I can forgive since it's definitely a thing that works better in a written medium like a light novel, where you can't really see exactly what they look like beforehand. I remember ReZero Season 2 actually ran into a similar issue, adapting stuff that was clearly meant for a book rather than animation. What I like about Sophia, though, is that she places Rudeus in such a great next step for his character. He's reincarnated, he's learned magic, he's overcome his trauma of going outside and interacting with people, and now he has the power and the will to protect someone who is in the exact same position he was. A lonely kid who gets bullied and ostracized, and that is just such great development for Rudeus, not only to be in that position of wanting and being able to help somebody, but also just the months that he spends with Sophia, making his first true friend in this world, his first true friend in decades. I also like that despite Rudeus carrying over all of his emotional maturity and wit into this new world, he's also carried over traits that aren't so great or positive, and also kind of uses them to his advantage sometimes. It's hard to explain, but one example of this is obviously just Rudeus' pure stupidity thinking that Sophia was a guy the entire time just because she had short hair, and even Paul is like, my son, how are you this dumb? But one example of these past life traits that comes into play in an interesting way is when Paul is arguing with Rudeus about what he did to that kid in town. Rudeus is going all in on Paul with facts and logic about how, okay, fine, I'll team up on the bullying next time if that's what you want, and then I'll just leave this house if that's what you're going to encourage. And it's really hard to describe, but the way this argument was portrayed and the way Rudeus defends himself in this overly passive-aggressive way was just so grounded and weirdly realistic to how people in real life argue, how I argue sometimes. And Rudeus even comments afterwards saying, I have experience weaseling my way out of unwinnable arguments, and I like that this connects back to his real life, back when he probably made tons of excuses and passive-aggressive arguments about why he can't leave the house, why he can't move forward in life, and all of that is just communicated extremely well. It also leads to some great comedy, and I have to say that this was probably the funniest episode yet, and it's because the writing just continues to be utilized in really witty and interesting ways. Both the conversations between Paul and Rudy, and especially the monologues, man. I think I've reached a point where I'm not even thinking about the ecchi and the more risque dialogue because, well, one, it's being integrated less and less as Rudeus develops as a person, and it's also just being implemented in more clever, low-key ways. But also, I read something that I kind of agree with, and it's that element to the series, Rudeus' dialogue and monologues in general, is a large part of the identity of this story. Without it, I think you do lose a lot of character and a lot of personality. Speaking of Rudeus, and back to his interactions with Sophia, one thing that surprised me that I really appreciated was how genuinely upset he was after the entire bath incident with Sylphie. Like, I guarantee there's going to be someone who tries to turn that entire scene into some kind of controversy, but it really wasn't a controversy. It was a complete misunderstanding, and you see Rudeus really down and broken up about that mistake he made. You might even look at that and think that it's kind of out of character for how Rudeus has acted this far in the story, but what I see from it is someone who is legitimately sad that he's made his first real mistake in his new life. The life that he promised himself he would work towards becoming a better person. He hurt his first friend in who knows how long, and with this new mentality of just becoming a more likable and honest person, it makes sense why even something that in retrospect will be a pretty small mistake is actually really hurting him. It's a good character detail, and it does make him a lot more likable and sympathetic as a person. Moving on from the straight up story and character elements, there wasn't a whole lot of lore or world building to dig into this episode, but there were some key details that are very telling and very interesting to speculate on. And one of them was actually something I was going to talk about last week, but I'm glad I waited because now there's even more to talk about. Incantationless magic. What is it? Who can use it, and why? Last week, Roxy, the magic teacher and the most proficient user of magic we've seen in the series so far, could not perform magic in this way over the course of trying to for probably the entirety that she taught Rudeus, so 2 years? Whereas Sophia tries doing it and is able to within the span of a minute. So What's going on here, man? It clearly doesn't have anything to do with being skilled at magic, because both Rudeus and Sylphie were able to do it when they were both very new to magic. So my guess, and my speculation, is that it either is something genetic, or it just is something that you're magically blessed with. I don't know, man. There's probably more to it. I know this isn't much of a speculation. It's probably a lot more complicated and is going to be explained in the future, but there's not really much to go on with that right now. On the topic of magic, though, I really enjoyed seeing the different applications of it so far, and I had actually heard a little bit about the magic system in Mushoku beforehand, and I was told that there's a lot more thought and science behind the magic in Mushoku compared to a lot of other isekai series, and you can see that this episode with the way Rudeus creates warm wind. It's not just some basic wind spell, he actually casts fire and water at the same time and creates a wind from both of them interacting with each other. And I'm just gonna say it, I'm gonna say it right now. If that's the direction we're going with magic in this series, it has the potential to become one of my favorite power systems in anime. Those are big words, I know, and I know we're starting off pretty basic and pretty small, but if magic continues to be treated in this way with thought and intelligence and grounded in a world, that is something that is so clever and interesting and refreshing in a genre and in a medium that usually does not care about that at all. It actually reminds me a lot of Fullmetal Alchemist, another series that takes those supernatural ideas and presents them in a more grounded, scientific way. What I want to know at this point is, where is the show going with all of this? Where's the story going? And this is not a complaint. I do not want it to sound like I am against not knowing where the story is leading. On the contrary, I think it's really exciting that the true shape of this story still hasn't really been shown. Rudeus' goal of becoming a better person is so vague that the story could honestly go in any direction and it would fit it regardless. From what we know about the world so far, there's not really a worldwide threat or common enemy that Rudeus will eventually have to face. I mean, there's the spirit that they have set up, but we don't really know anything about them. We don't know who they are, what their motivations are, or even if that entire race of demons are even bad in the first place. Knowing this series, there's probably going to be a lot more complexity than that. So just not knowing where anything is leading to right now is so mysterious and exciting, and it makes me anticipate next week's episode even more. But the last thing I really just want to say about this week's episode, and I feel like I haven't really been giving them the credit they deserve for all of their work on the show so far, but just Studio Bind, man. Studio Bind have the potential to become one of my favorite anime studios if they keep up this quality of work into the rest of Mushoku and whatever else they work on in the future. This might be the most visually impressive episode of the series yet, and it's not like there's a crazy magic casting Sakuga this week like there has been in the past, but just the overall consistency here. How beautiful it is to look at, how gorgeous the backgrounds are, how many little details are scattered everywhere. It's just so refreshing and brings this world to life in a way that you rarely ever see in anime. One example is just this quick scene of Rudeus and Sylphie running through the wheat. This is gorgeous, dude. It's so beautiful to look at, and yet it's a scene that doesn't really have any importance. It's just a transition from scene to another scene, and yet it feels more important because of how much work they put into this one sequence. I can't speak enough praises about all of the work that Bind has been doing on this show so far, and one thing I actually wanted to bring attention to is this post on Reddit that a couple people showed me on Discord of the obscene amount of detail that Bind has been putting into just the setting of this series. Shout out to DreamArch on Reddit for posting this, but it just really shows how much understated work goes into really fleshing out the environment that these characters live in. Great work from everyone involved. I'm still loving this series a lot, and while I am sad that there apparently won't be any opening visuals, I kind of love even more that they're going the Aria route of just playing the opening but starting the episode with more contextual, episode-specific scenery and footage. It's really efficient storytelling, and it's something you don't see enough of just because animating 90 more seconds every single week is probably a lot of work. That'll be all from me though. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you all thought of the episode in the comments below. Let me know how you feel about the absolute Chad that is Paul, the absolute cutie that is Sylphie, etc., etc. We all know they're great, but I like hearing your guys' takes as well. You can also follow me on Twitter and join my Discord server if you want another place to talk with me and a bunch of other cool people about this series while we wait for new episodes. Links are in the description, and you can also subscribe if you want to catch my Mushoku reviews every single week. I love you, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.